Welcome in, everyone. Congrats, Pietro, on getting firsts. Congrats, Guilty, on getting seconds. We are doing more American folklore tonight. And I looked at what's coming up, and we get to start talking about Billy the Kid. So that'll be interesting. I'm kind of curious. Is my microphone as loud as I've been hearing it on my VODs? Just listening to my VODs and editing for the past few days, I'm almost blaring it out. And right now, watching the meter, I'm staying in the green. I think I might peak out in the yellow, but that's it. So I don't know if it's just picking it up better or not. Hey, Death Parm! Congrats on third. So we're still talking about folklore villains in America, so you should be good. If you want to call Billy the Kid a folklore villain, because he's the first person we're going to talk to today. Talk about. So it should be interesting. Let's see, it's 9:01. Can't really think of anything to talk about. Although I would say that Wild West Wildlife, the charity I'm doing right now, they're doing a really good job in cleaning up the zoo since they were allowed to take it over. I haven't had a chance to go out and help them with that, but you know, I'm sure we'll every now and then. So, if everyone is ready, we can go ahead and go for the book, if you want. And I'm amused. There's a cat laying just off camera. It's laying down next to the bed instead of on the bed. Because cats be cats. Okay. Let's make sure I had everything on here. Don't hear the fireplace, but so last week we learned about Wild Bill Hickok and got confused because he has multiple names. It's either William Hitchcock or James William Hickok. So can't decide what his name really is. But tonight we're going into another so-called killer. This one definitely has a lot of stories about him. Because tonight we have Billy the Kid. 1. The people remember the kid. If you would learn that in affectionate regard the people of New Mexico cherish the memory of Billy the Kid today, you will have but to journey into the leisurely fashion through Billy the Kid country. Everyone will have a story to tell you of his courage, generosity, loyalty, lightheartedness, engaging boyishness. More than likely, you yourself will fall under the spell of these kindly tales, and before you are aware, yourself warming with romantic sympathy to the idealized picture of heroic and adventurous youth. Sit, for instance, on one of the benches under the shade tree in the old square of Santa Fe, where the wagon caravans used to end their long journey across the plains. Here the rich and poor of this ancient capital of the land of Manana and sunshine come every day to while away the hour, smoke and talk politics. Mention Billy the Kid to some leisurely burgher, instantly his face will light up. He will cease his tirade against the graft and the corruption of high places, and go off into interminable anecdotes. Yes, Billy the Kid lived here in Santa Fe when he was a boy. Many a time when he was an outlaw with a price on his head, he rode into town and danced all nights at the dance hall over on Galisto Street. The house is still there, the pink adobe and the white door. Yeah, the pink adobe with the blue door and window shutters. Did the police attempt to arrest him? Not much. Those blue-coated fellows valued their hides. Why, that boy wasn't afraid of the devil, say, once over at Anton Chico, or drop into some little adobe home in Puerto de Luna, or in Santa Rosa, or on the Hondo, or anywhere between the Raton and Seven Rivers. Perhaps the Mexican housewife will serve you with frijoles and tortillas and coffee with goat's milk. If you are wise in the ways of Mexicans, you will tear off a fragment of the tortilla and, cupping it between your fingers, use it as a spoon to eat your frijoles that are red with chili pepper, swimming in soup rich with fat bacon grease. But between mouthfuls of these beings of the gods, and you will be ready to swear that they are, else you are no connoisseur in beans, don't forget to make some casual reference to Billy the Kid. Then watch the face of your hostess. At mention of the magic name, she will smile softly and dreamlight will come into her eyes.
Billy the Kid. Have you heard of him? He was a grand boy, senor. All Mexican people his friend. You never hear a Mexican say that any word against Billy the Kid. Everybody loved that boy. He was so kind-hearted, so generous, so brave, and so handsome. Nombre de Dios. Every little senorita was crazy about him. They all tried to catch that Billy the Kid for their sweethearts. Many a pretty muchacha cry her eyes out when he is killed, and when she counted her beads to mass, she had a prayer for good measure for the soul and rest in peace. Poor Billy the Kid, he was a good boy, muy valiente, muy caballero.
Or ask Frank Coe about him. You will find him a white-haired old man, now on his fruit ranch in Ruidoso Canyon. He fought in the Lincoln County War by Kid's side, and he will tell you his story and may sit in a rocking chair under the cottonwoods while the Ruidoso River sings its pleasant tune just back from the rambling one-story adobe ranch house.
Billy the Kid, says Coe, lived with me for a while after he came to Lincoln County in the fall of 1877, just a little before he went to work for Tunstall and the Feliz. No, he didn't work for me. He just lived with me, right in the chuck line. Didn't have anywhere else special to stay just then. He did a lot of hunting that winter. Billy was a great hunter, and the hills hereabouts were full of wild turkey, deer, and cinnamon bear. Billy could hit a bear's eye as far as I could hardly see the bear. He was only 18 years old, a nice-looking young fellow as you'd care to meet, and certainly mighty pleasant company. Many a night he and I sat up before a pine knot fire swapping yarns. Yes, he had killed quite a few men even then, but it didn't seem to weigh on him, none at all. Ghosts, I reckon, never bothered Billy. He was about as cheerful as a little hombre as I ever ran across. Not the grim sullen kind, but full of talk, and it seemed to me he was laughing half his time.
Thank you for the look, Salty.
You never saw such shooting as that lad could do. Not a dead shot. I've heard about these dead shots, but I never happened to meet one. Billy was the best shot with a six-shooter I ever saw, but he missed sometimes. Jesse Evans, who fought on the Murphy side, used to brag that he was as good a shot as a kid, but I never thought so, and I knew Jesse and have seen him shoot. Jesse, by the way, used to say, too, that he wasn't afraid of Billy the Kid, which was just another one of his brags. He was scared to death of Kid, and once they met in Lincoln, Billy made him take water and make him like it. Billy used to do a whole lot of practice shooting around the ranch. He had a barn peppered full of holes. I've heard people say that they have seen him empty a shooter at a hat tossed about 20 feet into the air and hit it 6 times before it struck the ground. I won't say he couldn't do it, but I never saw him do it. One of his favorite stunts was to shoot at snowbirds sitting on a fence post along the road as he rode by with his horse at a gallop. Sometimes he'd miss a few. The average was about 1 in 3, and I'd say that was mighty good shooting. Billy had had a little schooling, and he could read and write as well as anybody else around here. I never saw him reading any books, but he was a great hand to read newspapers whenever he could get a hold of any. He absorbed a lot of education from his newspaper reading. I didn't talk like a backwoodsman. I don't suppose he knew about the rules of grammar, but he did make the common, glaring mistakes of ignorant people. His speech was that of an intelligent and fairly well-educated man. He had a clean mind. His conversation was never coarse or vulgar. And while most of the men whom he associated with swore like pirates, he rarely uttered an oath. He was a free-hearted, generous boy. He'd give a friend the shirt off his back. His money came easy when it came, but sometimes it didn't come. He was a gambler, and like all gamblers, his life was chicken one day and feathers the next. Pocket full of money today and broke tomorrow. Monte was his favorite game. He banked the game and bucked it, depending on his finances. He was slick a dealer as ever threw a card, and as a player, he was shrewd, usually lucky, and bet 'em high, and limit on every turn. While he stayed with me, he broke a Mexican Monte bank every little down in the canyon of San Patrico. If he happened to lose, he'd take it like a good gambler, and not crack a joke and walk away whistling with his hands rammed in his empty pockets. Losing his money never made him mad. To tell the truth, I never saw Billy the Kid mad in my life, and I knew him several years. Think what you please, the kid had a lot of principle. He was about as honest a fellow as I ever knew outside of the loose notions about rustling cattle. This was stealing, of course, but I don't believe it struck him exactly that way. It didn't seem to have any personal element to it. There were the cattle running loose on the plains without any owner in sight or sign of ownership, except the brands, seeming like part of the landscape. Billy, being in his fashion a sort of potentate running a large portion of the landscape with a six-shooter, felt, I suppose, like he had some sort of proprietary claim on those cattle, and it didn't seem to him like robbery. Well, not exactly, to run them off and cash in on them in the nearest market. That's at least one way of figuring it out. But as for other low-down kinds of theft, like sticking up a lonely traveler on the highway, or burglarizing a house, or picking pockets, he was just as much above that sort of thing as you and me. I've trusted him with my last dollar I had in the world. One thing is certain, he never stole a cent in his life from a friend. The history of Billy the Kid already had been clouded by legend. Less than 50 years after his death, it is not always easy to differentiate fact from myth. Historians have been afraid of him, as if this boy of six-shooter deadliness might fatally injure their reputations if they set themselves seriously to write of a career of such dime or ludicrous. As a consequence, history has been neglected. Fantastic details have been added to the tales and have been told and retold. He is already a process of evolving into a hero of the southwestern Nibelungen. Such a mass of stories has grown about him that it seems safe to predict that, in spite of anything history can do to rescue the facts of his life, he is destined eventually to be transformed by popular legend into the Robin Hood of New Mexico, a heroic outlaw endowed with every noble quality, fighting in the battle of the common people against the tyranny of wealth and power. Innumerable stories in which Billy the Kid figures as a semi-mythical hero are to be picked up throughout New Mexico. They are told at every campfire on the range, enliven the winter evenings in every Mexican home. There is doubtless a grain of truth in every one, but the troubadour torch is upon them all. You will not find them in books, where their chief interest perhaps lies in the fact that they are examples of oral legend, kept alive in memory and passed on by storytellers, with one generation storyteller to the next in Homeric succession. They are folklore in making,
and each narrative adds little bits of drama and a picturesque detail here. One wonders what form these legends will assume as time goes by, and in what heroic proportions Billy the Kid will appear in the fireside fairy tales 100 years from now or so. I already know a lot of extra stories have been made of Billy the Kid. Two, the War of Billy the Kid. Chapter 5, Lincoln County War. To the average dweller in that portion of the Great West known as New Mexico, the Lincoln County War is as well known as the internecine War of the Roses to the people of the time of York and Lancaster. Its causes and its results yet form the theme of conversation around many a campfire on a winter's night or summer's evening, and it will be in many years before the tale will have grown old and uninteresting. Were nothing else needed to make it live as the mere fact that the Kid was a leading spirit of a deadly strife which sufficed to give it a certain place in history. Much as small men are known as the husbands of Mr. or Mrs. the actress or the lecturer, will the Lincoln imbroglio be known as the War of Billy the Kid? According to Marion Turner, who was a prominent actor in the war, the trouble began with the determination of old John Chisholm and partner Alex McSwain to establish a monopoly on the stock grazing business and make themselves in truth the cattle kings of the Pecos Valley. This valley is next to that of the Rio Grande, the most important in the territory, running as it does almost along the entire length from north to south, and is, with the exception of Rio Hondo, the only one of any size in Lincoln County. To have entire command of such a large range would be a fortune in itself. Chisholm drove in 80,000 head of cattle. The herds of the smaller rancheros were swept away, as if by avalanche, by a multitude of hooves and horns. Naturally enough, those who lost little all in this manner attempted to reclaim their animals. This was dangerous business, and collisions between herders were a daily occurrence. The smaller fry banded together with the leadership of Murphy, Dolan, and Co., men who had important cattle interests and were anxious to defend them. Both sides were enlisted all the strength and influence they could command and prepared for that big war to be a deadly conflict. Chisholm and McSwain, in a happy moment, hired the Kid into his daredevil ways, his deadly marksmanship, his perfect command of a horse, and combined with what seemed to be an absolute delight in murder, and soon caused him to be made the leader of this faction. The strife progressed, with alternate success and defeat for each party. Early in 1879, Chisholm arranged for the appointment of the Kid as deputy constable, and clothed in this authority, he was given a warrant for the arrest, on a trivial charge, of Billy Morton and Frank Baker, two herders employed by Tom Calton. This captain, by the way, used to live in Lafayette County, Missouri, and was a partner of the Honorable Stephen B. Elkins, himself a Missouri boy. Later delegated to Congress from New Mexico, and now one of the moneyed men of New York. The Kid saddled his horse when told what he was to be done, and without a word to any of his comrades, silently rode off to the range in search of his prey, accompanied by one McCluskey. He found Morton and his companions in a camp near the eastern boundary of the county, and showing him the warrant, he said, "You're my prisoners. Come along." "What do you want from me?" said Morton in a threatening tone. "Shut up or I'll blow your brains out. You've been working against Chisholm. That's enough." But "You'll see about this pretty soon, young man," said Baker. "It's a free country. No man arrests me without I know what it's for." "I haven't told you white-livered friend the reason. Hold your tongue, or I'll stop it forever with a bullet." At this point, McCluskey interfered and remonstrated with the young desperado. You don't mean to kill a defenseless man, do you?" he said. "If I wish to, yes, and you too." With these words, the Kid drew his revolver, and before the astonished McCluskey could move his hand, shot him with his tricks. "You see how I treat a man who fooled me, do you? the murderer said as he scornfully kicked the lifeless form at his feet. "Be careful what you do, or I'll serve you the same as I served him." Chaining the two men together by the wrists and carefully securing them to the saddle, he placed both of them on McCluskey's horse and started back at a slow trot toward Chisholm's ranch. The feelings of the prisoners can easily be imagined. Should they be taken to camp when the vengeance of Chisholm would have upon their heads? There was, at least, a chance of escape. If the handcuffs could only be loosened and the chain parted, a successful break might be made. Those ifs must be gotten one way in the next 20 miles. The men worked cautiously and had almost freed themselves when the watchful eye of the kid spied their movements. Without saying a word, he coolly pulled his rifle from his shoulder and fired twice at them. The distance was only 10 feet, and his aim, sure the reports were followed by the simultaneous fall of both Morton and Baker, and in a moment their souls had flown up to what we may presume was a greener range, where even the cowboy has a place. Shot dead without hardly an excuse. Thus the kid added 2 more to the list of those he had felt in his deadly power. Thus far he had killed 4 men, and the career of his pseudo-James boy had hardly begun. Fearful in its beginning, the reader must judge the righteousness of the end. Riding into camp, the kid informed Chisholm of what he had done, and asked that the 2 men be sent out to bury him. "Where's McCluskey?" asked Chisholm. "None of your goddamn business," replied the kid. "It is my business, and I will know. I'm not afraid of you, and you may as well understand it any time now." "Come on, old fellow," he said, changing his tone and manner. "I was just bantering with you a little. To be honest about it, I killed Mick." "Killed him? That's the racket. Why? What's he done?" "Too infernally inquisitive. Didn't know his place either. Thought he'd try to boss the job, but I settled him quickly." "He was my best man, next to you," said Chisholm, after a pause in which he eyed the kid closely and rubbed his chin reflectively. "Don't care if it was. He had to go." "You know, kid, that this affair will leak out and the officers will be down here to inquire into it and arrest you?" "Chisholm, you must think I'm a fool. There are no more for Brady and Hinman than I do for a dog. If they get the drop on me, all right, but the kid won't be caught napping, and don't you forget it." "I'm afraid they'll bring the troops down on us." "Let them do it. If we can't whip the company of bluecoats, why then I'll change my name and herd sheep in the States." With this solicitation, the kid carelessly sauntered down to his tent and threw himself down to catch a few hours' sleep before the next morning should dawn. Yep, sounds about right. Chapter 6. Numbers 5 and 6. As scented by Chisholm, the news of the killing of Morton, McCluskey, and Baker quickly reached the ears of the authorities of the county. Although wild speculation, the triple murder could not be winked at, or a reign of lawlessness would ensure destructive of all the already loose fabric of society that contains elements of disaster of a great moment to the cattlemen and their employees, as well as to the few farmers and storekeepers in Lincoln County. When Sheriff Brady first heard of the kid's bloody deed from the lips of a special detective, who in turn learned the fact from one of Chisholm's men, a friend of the murdered parties, and who had recently been discharged because of suspected intimacy with the opposing faction, he realized that in capturing the murderer he would have no easy task to perform. I know. Dang, 2 more bots. I've got 3 bots tonight. What the hell? The matter was talked over carefully with his deputy, George Hinman, and it was resolved to at once proceed with Chisholm Ranch, and, if possible, effect the capture. No one else is taken into the secret, as it was feared that the kid might be informed by the intended raid of the officers and prepare himself accordingly. The precaution was, however, an unnecessary one, since he was always ready to meet a personal enemy of an officer of the law, knowing himself to be practically an outcast with the hand of almost every man against him. The news came to Bradley Wednesday. The murders were committed Monday. The officers left Thursday and bound for the home of the kid. Each was heavily armed and rode horses of fine staying powers. The trip was a solemn one. They fully recognized the fact that the chances of coming back alive were hardly even. Indeed, before the start was made, they settled their business affairs and otherwise made ready for an emergency. "I'll confess I don't like this," replied Headman to his superior as they galloped out of Lincoln. "You're not afraid, are you?" replied Brady. "Oh, man ever saw George Hinman turn pale, even when he looked down the barrel of a rifle in the hands of the enemy," he said. "But I can't shake off the feeling, somehow or other, that we won't come back out of this fight alive." "Kiddoo's a bad man, I know," replied Bradley. After a moment's thought, "if I take him off his guard, he will be my prisoner, and no blood will be spilled either." "Catch a cat sleeping. The kid's been surrounded by men who will defend him to the last. I tell you, it's a bad job. We are in for it, though." It will be seen that they did not walk into the trap blindly, but with eyes open. It is all very well to praise the immortal 600 who made the charge at Balaclava, or one of those becoming enthusiastic at the bravery of the men of Bunker Hill or Vicksburg. But the impressionistic mind of this act of Brady and Hinsman had more elements of heroism than the others. The one faced death in behalf of an idea, surrounded by all the glory of conquest and the insanity of battle. The other, in behalf of law and order, quietly took even chances of death or life without the murmur of a loan. A few words will tell the story. All day Thursday the kid seemed possessed with the idea that something would happen. As he expressed himself to a comrade, "Either I or a man I met whom will die today." At an early hour, he cleansed his rifle carefully, loaded it with a heavy ball, an extra charge of powder, placed the new cap in position, and looked in the proper equipment of his derringers, and was never a moment off his guard. Between the hours of 11 and 12, his watchful eye discerned 2 horsemen riding slowly to the ranch from the west. At an instant he espied them. They were fully 5 miles off. In 40 minutes they would be at the ranch. In 20 they would be near enough to be recognized. As they came nearer, making a detour to the south, hoping to reach a grove and escape observation until it was almost the destination, the kid procured a spyglass and leveled it in the direction of the approaching horsemen. "The officers," said, quietly walking to McSwain's adobe, which was located at the mid-side of the little hamlet. He placed himself in readiness. 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes had elapsed. The sound was heard and around the corner, the measured tramp of approaching feet. The kid peered cautiously around the corner. The 2 officers. Then he discovered himself to them, and at the same time raising his rifle to his shoulder and pulling the trigger, with the barrel aimed at Brady's heart. There was a quick flash, and followed by a loud report and a white cloud of smoke. Then another flash and another report. The south wind quickly cleared the air. Stepping forward with the derringer drawn, the little kid saw Brady and Hindman at his feet, one dead, and the other breathing faintly, asking to be put out of his misery. "You shall go as quick as I send you," the cowboy said. "Give Baker my love." And he placed the muzzle of his derringer at Hindman's right temple and finished the bloody work. By this time a crowd had gathered, but no one, if so inclined, dared to arrest the kid. Instead, he ordered his comrades to join him in an hour, fully equipped with arms, ammunition, and horses, saying that it would be too hot for them as soon as Baker's friends discovered the murder, and that escape must be made to the mountains where defense could be easily made. Accordingly, gathered with him around a band of outlaws and desperadoes and defied county, territory, and the United States authorities. What is that? Dominating? Oh, dang, missed it. Chapter 7. The Crisis. The tacit defiance of the law, the reign of terror and bloodshed inaugurated by the kid, were met in a determined manner by the proper authorities. June 15th, 1879, 2 days after the occurrence mentioned in the preceding chapter, Marion Turner, deputy sheriff of Lincoln County, had a warrant placed in his hands for the arrest of the kid for the murder of Morton Baker, McCluskey, Bradley, and Henman. Turner was not a very brave man, but very wise. He knew that the man for whom he had a warrant was a desperate character, and therefore desperate measures were resorted to effect his capture. Turner organized a posse of 35 men, consisting principally of ranchmen and cowboys of the anti-Chisholm faction. In adopting this course, Turner not only took advantage of the general horror which every man would feel at the cold-blooded murders, but also the peculiar and intense hatred entertained against the kid and his gang by those who conceived their rights had been trampled by Chisholm. The posse was not a very large one, but every man in the crowd was an expert handler of the rifle and could be depended on in an emergency. The emergencies were very liable to arise. This readiness and nervousness was a good and important factor of the problem. On the 17th day of June, after being out 2 days, Turner and his posse came upon the kid and his 63 men. The place where they met was a narrow canyon at the mouth of a range of low foothills. To the right was a thickly wooded expanse, and to the left huge boulders with here and there a straggling pine tree, while in front ran a small stream which had its source 10 miles distant to the north. The kid's party had made their camp 5 miles up the stream and had come down to the place where it left the hills in order to reconnoiter when they met back with Turner's posse. The former divided, one division running back to protect their camp, and the other remained to confront the posse, each side thus being evenly balanced. Turner halted nearly 100 yards from where the kid was standing, and arranging his forces in the best possible manner with each man's hand on his rifle, stepped out a few steps in ranks and read his warrant. To the requisition of a defiant answer was returned to the effect that they would never get him, dead or alive, whereupon Turner ordered his men to arrest him. They advanced at the double quick on horseback, but the kid, wishing to avoid a fight until he could effect a junction with the remainder of his gang, was as well secured a better position and hastily retreated. Seeing his purpose, the order was given to fire, but the aim of the posse was rendered uncertain by the motion of the horses, and only 2 men were hit, one being seriously and the other fatally wounded. None of the sheriff's party were touched by the returning full sight. The fight continued in this way for 5 miles, neither side shooting another fatal shot. A decided stand was made at the camp, and Turner drew off for consultation. At the camp all was bustle and confusion. A rude embankment had been thrown up, behind which the kid, his men, the horses, and pack animals were waiting to receive the unexpected onslaught. The consultation between Turner and his men resulted in an employment of strategy. They retired a short distance and halted just on the edge of the wood. 10 of the party formed a line along its edge, and the other 25 dashed into the wood with the intention of making a circuit and coming in upon the gang from the rear. This was easily accomplished, provided the ruse was successful, because the kid camp had joined in the woods on the right. The danger of the undertaking lay in the fact that if the plan was discovered, the little party of 10 would fall an easy prey to a foe outnumbering them 6 to 1. And the minutes that succeeded the departure of the 25 were anxious ones to those who remained. Every movement of the enemy was watched, and a show of preparation for renewing the conflict was kept up. 5 minutes had passed. The detour should have been made in that time. The kid appeared at the lead of his men and began to file out of the camp, confident in the superiority of numbers and his own charm to life. At this moment, not a second too soon, a yell was heard from behind. Turner had flanked them. They turned and another yell was heard. The 10 who had guarded the operation from their comrades rushed up to the stream. A deadly fire was poured in from both sides, and for a moment all was confusion and panic. At this juncture the kid dashed forward, and calling upon his men to rally, broke through the opposing force, killing one of them and slightly wounding two more. He was followed by Turner, the nemesis. Volley after volley was fired, and the flight was so rapid that neither the dead nor the wounded were cared for. On, in feverish haste, crossing and recrossing the little stream, turned, fired, and then savagely spurring their horses forward. They fairly flew. Of the 65 men whom the kid led into the canyon, only 40 escaped alive, while Turner lost but only 5. The odds had changed. They were not as favorable to the desperado. Across the plain, dodging here and there, here and there. Now advancing, then retreating, the two forces went, which each weakening vengeance on the other, each paying old scores and getting the better of two enemies. Strange as it may seem, this running fight lasted 2 days with scarcely a stop for food and water. The forces by this time had become considerably reduced, numbering but 25 each. Lieutenant Colonel Dudley of the famous 9th Cavalry, leaning that reinforcements were sent to the Kid, took 2 companies of his regiment and went to Turner's assistance. As luck would have it, Dudley was first on the ground, and the Kid and his gang at once retreated towards Lincoln, which was but a few miles distant. They took shelter in McSwain's house, one of the most elegantly furnished dwellings in the territory, in which only the fashionable were wont to enter. The cavalry rushed up, but were repulsed and fell back. Again the line was formed, this time on foot, and an advance was made. This fight raged furiously. It was a question of annihilation for one side or the other, and every man fought like a demon. Portholes were cut out, and rifle balls sent to the unerring aim. The house became a fort, and the garden surrounding it a battlefield. During the battle, Mrs. McSwain encouraged the garrison by playing martial airs on her piano and singing inspiring battle songs. The besieging posse soon got in the range of the piano from the sound, and shot it to pieces with their heavy buffalo rifles, the wife of McSwain narrowly escaping. This siege was of 3 days' duration. On the 3rd day of the fight, Turner, being convinced that he could not be conquered by legitimate warfare, ordered the house to be fired by throwing bucketfuls of blazing coal on the roof and inside the windows. This precipitated the crisis, and about dusk on the 3rd day, the desperadoes made a rush for their horses, with the intention of thereby effecting an escape. A hand-to-hand combat ensued in which 12 of the Kid's men and 2 of Turner's posse were killed, McSwain being among the number. During the rush from the burning house, Tom O'Farrell's, a pard of the Kid's, young and from San Antonio, Texas, noticed a friend fall. Although the storm of balls and buckshot rained around him, he coolly stopped, picked up his comrade, and was about to carry him when he noticed that he was dead. Throwing the body down, he drew a sword and fought his way out. This brave fellow was afterwards killed by a deputy sheriff, Garrett's posse, shortly after the capture of the Kid. The leader of the gang, the Kid, seemed to bear a charmed existence. 100 bullets were speeded towards him, and not one reached the mark. He escaped without a scratch, and with barely a dozen men fled, hotly pursued, but never caught. Immediately after this fearful flight, he reorganized his followers, received ascensions to his cause, and was again in condition to make an average New Mexican go to bed with a feeling of insecurity. The Kid, in the meanwhile, had added 5 names to his death toll, and now numbered 11. Three. Death of Billy the Kid. In March 1881, a deputy United States Marshal by the name of John W. Poe arrived in the booming mining camp of White Oaks. He had been sent to New Mexico by the Cattlemen's Association of the Texas Panhandle. Cattle King Charlie Goodnight, being the president of the association, had selected Mr. Poe as the proper man to put a stop to the stealing of Panhandle cattle by Billy the Kid and gang. After the Kid's escape, Pat Garrett went to White Oaks and deputized John W. Poe to assist him in rounding up the Kid. From now on, Mr. Poe made trips into the mountains, trying to locate the young outlaw. The Kid's best friends argued that he was nobody's fool and would not remain in the United States, when the old Mexico border was so near. They didn't realize that Little Cupid was shooting his tender heart full of love darts straight to the heart of the pretty little Miss Dulcinea del Toboso of Fort Sumner. Dulcinea. So Billy the Kid had the same girlfriend's name as... Don Quixote. Dulcinea. Early in June, Pat Garrett received a letter from an acquaintance from the name of Brazil in Fort Sumner, advising him that the kid was hanging around there. Garrett at once wrote Brazil to meet him about dark on the night of July 13th at the mouth of the Taliban Arroyo before Fort Sumner. Now the sheriff took his trusted deputy, John W. Poe, and rode to Roswell on the Rio Pecos. There they were joined by one of Mr. McGarrett's fearless cowboy deputies, Kip McKinney, who had been raised near Uvalde, Texas. Together the three law enforcers rode up the river towards Fort Sumner, a distance of 80 miles. They arrived at the mouth of the Taliban Arroyo an hour after dark on July 13th, but Brazil was not able to meet them. The night was spent sleeping in the saddle blankets. The next morning, Garrett sent Mr. Poe, who was a stranger in the country, and for that reason would not be suspicioned, into Fort Sumner, 5 miles north, to find out what he could on the sly about the kid's presence. In Fort Sumner, he was to go to Sunnyside, 6 miles north, to interview a merchant by the name of Mr. Rudolph. Then, when the moon was rising, to meet Garrett and McKinney on La Punta de la Glorieta, about 4 miles north of Fort Sumner. Failing to find out anything of importance about the kid, John W. Poe met his two companions at the appointed place, and they rode into Fort Sumner. It was about 11 o'clock, and the moon was shining brightly when the officers rode in an old orchard and concealed their horses. Now the three continued afoot to the home of Pete Maxwell, a wealthy stockman who was both a friend of Garrett and the kid. He lived in a long, one-story adobe building, which had been the U.S. officers' quarters when the soldiers were stationed there. The house faced south and had a wide covered porch in front. The grassy front yard was surrounded by a picket fence. As Pat Garrett had courted his wife and married her in this town, he knew every foot of the ground, even to Pete Maxwell's private bedroom. On reaching the picket gate and near the corner room, which Pete Maxwell always occupied, Garrett told his two deputies to wait there until after he had a talk with the half-breed Pete Maxwell. The night being hot, Pete Maxwell's door stood wide open, and Garrett walked in. A short time previous, Billy the Kid had arrived from the sheep camp out in the hills. Back of the Maxwell's home lived a Mexican servant who was a warm friend to the kid. Here Billy the Kid always found late newspapers, placed here by loving hands for his special benefits. This old servant had gone to bed. The kid lit a lamp and pulled off his coat and boots. Now he glanced over the papers to see if his name was mentioned. Finding nothing of interest in the papers, he asked the old servant to get up and cook him some supper, as he was very hungry. Getting up, the servant told him that there was no meat in the house. The kid remarked that he would go and get some from Pete Maxwell. Now he picked up a butcher knife from the table and cut the meat with, and started barefooted and bareheaded. The kid passed within a few feet of the end of the porch where sat John W. Poe and Kip McKinney. The latter had raised up when his spur rattled, which attracted the kid's attention. At the same moment, Mr. Poe stood up and opened a small open gateway leading to the street from the end of the porch. They supposed the man coming towards him, only partly dressed, was a servant, or possibly Pete Maxwell. The kid had pulled his pistol, and so had John Poe, who by that time was almost within arm's reach of the kid. With the pistol pointing at Poe, and at the same time asking in Spanish, "Yes," he was up. He backed into Pete Maxwell's room. He repeated the above question several times. On entering the room, Billy the Kid walked in with a few feet of Pat Garrett, who was sitting on Maxwell's bed, and asked, "Who are they, Pete?" Now discovering that the man on Pete's bed, the kid, was raised, pistol pointing towards the bed, began backing across the room. Pete Maxwell whispered to the sheriff, "That's him, Pat." By the time the kid had tried to streak back into the moonlight through the south window, asking, "Kiddos, who's that?" Garrett raised his pistol and fired, then cocked the pistol again, and it went off accidentally and put in a hole in the ceiling, or wall. Now the sheriff sprang out the door of the porch where stood the two deputies with pistols drawn. Soon after, Pete Maxwell ran out and came very near getting a ball in Poe's pistol. Garrett struck the pistol upward, saying, "Don't shoot, Maxwell!" The lighted candle was secured from the mother of Pete Maxwell, who occupied the nearby room, and the dead body, Billy the Kid, was found stretched out on his back, with a bullet wound to his breast, just above his heart. At the right hand lay a Colt .41 caliber pistol, at his left, a butcher knife. Now the native people began to collect, many of them being warm friends of the kids. Garrett allowed them to take the body across the street to the carpenter shop, where it was laid out on a bench. Then lighted candles were placed around what remains of what once were the bravest and coolest young outlaw who ever trod the face of the earth. The next day, this, one darling's mother, was buried by Next day, this, once mother's darling, was buried by the side of his chum, Tom O'Fallard, in the old military cemetery. He was killed at midnight, July 14th, 1881, being just 21 years, 7 months, and 21 days of age, and had killed 21 men, not including Indians, which he said couldn't count as human beings. Well, damn, Billy. Oh, there's a song. So I might sing the song, and then we'll get a break. Sound good? Yes? No? Maybe so? Torture people with my singing? That's what I do. 4. Song of Billy the Kid. I'll sing you a true song of Billy the Kid. I'll sing of the desperate deeds that he did. Way out in the New Mexico, long, long ago, when a man's only chance was his 40 or 4. When Billy the Kid was a very young lad, in old Silver City he went to the bad. Way out in the west with a gun in his hand, at the age of 12 years he killed his first man. The Mexican maidens play guitars and sing a song about Billy, their boy bandit king. Young manhood had reached its sad end. He'd notch on his pistol for 21 men. 'Twas on the same night when poor Billy died. He said to his friends, "I'm not satisfied. There are 21 men I've put bullets through, and Sheriff Pat Garrett must make 22. Now this is how Billy the Kid met his fate. The bright moon was shining, the hour was late. Shot down by Pat Garrett, who once was his friend. The young outlaw's life had now come to its end. There's many a man with a face fine and fair, who starts out in life with a chance to be square. But just like poor Billy, he wanders astray, loses his life in the very same way." Okay, the song has been sung. And when we get back, start talking about Jesse James. So, take the break a little early. See you in a bit. That break seems short. But they all do. Well, I guess I had my first song of the evening. Which is strange, because it's about to be followed up by the second. So, I don't know how I should feel. It's hard to have American folk tales without American folk music, right? Honestly, if my European folk tales had more music, I'd probably sing those too. But as I mentioned before the break, that's the end of Billy the Kid. Now we're going to go into Jesse James. Of course, the first thing under Jesse James. Jesse James. 1. The Ballad of Jesse James. Jesse James was a lad who killed many a man, robbed the Glendale train, he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. He'd had a mind and a heart and a brain. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard was laid Jesse James in his grave. It was Robert Ford, that dirty little coward. I wonder how he does feel. For he ate of Jesse's bread, and he slept in Jesse's bed, and he laid Jesse James in his grave. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, the children they were brave. But the dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard laid Jesse James in his grave. Jesse was a man, a friend to the poor. He'd never see a man suffer pain. With his brother Frank, he robbed the Chicago Bank and stopped the Glendale train. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward shot Mr. Howard has lain Jesse James in his grave. It was on a Wednesday night, the moon was shining bright. He stopped the Glendale train, and the people ought to say for many miles away it was robbed by Frank and Jesse James. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children that were so brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard had laid Jesse James in his grave. It was on Saturday night, and Jesse was home, talking to his family brave. Robert Ford came along like a thief in the night, and laid Jesse James in his grave. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard has laid Jesse James in his grave. The people held their breath when they heard of Jesse's death, and wondered how he ever came to die. It was one of the gang called Little Robert Ford that shot Jesse James in the sly. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard has laid Jesse James in his grave. Jesse went to his rest with a hand at his breast. The devil will be upon his knee. He was born one day in the county of Shay, and he came from a solitary race. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard has lain Jesse James in his grave. The song was made by Billy Glashade as soon as the news did arrive. He said there was no man in the law in his hand that could take Jesse James when alive. Jesse had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard has lain Jesse James in his grave. There, I've sung twice. You happy? And yes, I kept repeating the chorus. Didn't have to. Well, it was a nice thing. 2. Jesse and the Poor Widow. One day, says Sam Allender, Brett James told me that on a certain occasion he and his pals was traveling on horseback somewhere in northern Missouri. It being about noon, they were hungry. They pulled off the main road and found a lone woman in charge of a small farmhouse.
They asked her if she could supply them with something to eat. At first, the woman hesitated, and the men displayed money and assured her they would be glad to pay for what they ate. Then she proceeded to prepare such scant food as she had on hand. As she was making coffee and cooking eggs, James' crowd sat around the room. They noticed that she was weeping. Tears were rolling down her cheeks, and sobs were heaving in her bosom.
Jesse,
Said Frank, telling me the story.
was always tender-hearted, couldn't stand a woman's tears.
When he asked her why she was crying, she tried to smile it off, and said that seeing us men around the house reminded her of how happy a time she was when her husband was living and had other men now and then helping him to do the farm work. She was just thinking how sadly things had changed since his death, and that was what made her cry. So she said. Jessie kept on asking questions. The woman said she had several children at school, some miles down the road. There was a mortgage on the farm, and she went on to say it was for $1,400. It was overdue, and it was the last day of grace. Aha, said Jessie. So that's really what's making you cry. You're afraid you're going to lose your home, I see. Yes, that was it, she admitted. That very afternoon, she was a weeping widow, and the man who held the mortgage was coming out of town to demand his money. He was a hard-hearted old miser, she stated, and she didn't have a dollar to apply to the debts. The man would be sure to foreclose and turn her and her helpless little ones out. Huh? Said Jessie. That's so. His eyes blinking fast and furiously. Well, now, ma'am, I don't know about that. Well, no. I think maybe you won't lose your farm after all. The widow looked rather puzzled. She put the food on the table and all sat down and turned to. After we finished eating, Jessie produced a sack and counted out on the table $1,400. Here, lady, said Jessie. Take this money and pay off your mortgage. The lady was amazed. I can never pay you back, she said, and so I won't borrow it. But it's no loan, said Jessie. It's a gift. The widow said she couldn't believe it was anything but a dream. Things never happened that way, but Jessie assured her it was no dream. The money was good money, and it was for her use. Jessie then sat down and wrote out a form of receipts, which she had the woman copy in her own handwriting. He put the original in his pocket so that his handwriting wouldn't get into other hands. Jessie instructed the woman to pay the mortgage holder the $1,400 and gave him the sign and receipts in ink. Then he handed her a handful of cash for her immediate needs. Jessie asked the grateful widow to describe the man who held the mortgage. So she did, telling him the kind of rig he drove and what hour she expected him and the road by which he would come from the town. Then we bade her good day and mounted their horses. The widow was still weeping, but now weeping for joy. We rode some distance from the house and hid in the bushes beside the rocky road along the mortgage man was to come in his buggy. Presently we saw him driving toward the widow's house, and pretty soon driving back, looking prosperous. He was humming. Old Dan Tucker was a fine old feller as he came opposite. We stepped out onto the road and hailed him up, and recovered the $1,400. I asked Frank James, said Sam Adler, if they had any other difficulty in getting the money on that occasion than they had had on the other occasion when they first acquired it, and he replied with a laugh, No, Sam, I'm not getting sweaty. Now see, that is actually a fairly famous tale about Jesse James. And now you have the details of it. 3. The death of Jesse James. Between 8 and 9 o'clock yesterday morning, Jesse James, the Missouri outlaw, before whom the deeds of Fred DeValio, Dick Turpin, and Schenderhands dwindled into significance, was instantly killed by a boy 20 years old, named Robert Ford, at his temporary residence on the corner of 13th and Lafayette Streets in this city. In the light of all moral reasoning, the shooting was unjustifiable, but the law was vindicated, and the $10,000 reward offered by the state for the body of the brigand will doubtless go to the man who had the courage to draw a revolver on the notorious outlaw, even when his back was turned, as in this case. There's little doubt that the killing was a result of a premeditated plan formed by Robert and Charles Ford several months ago. Charles had been an accomplice of Jesse James since the 3rd of November, and entirely possessed his confidence. Robert Ford, his brother, joined Jesse near Mrs. Samuel's house, the mother of the James boys, last Friday a week ago, and accompanied Jesse and Charles to the city Sunday, March 23rd. Jesse, his wife, and 2 children moved from Kansas City, where they had lived several months until they feared their whereabouts would be suspected, to this city, arriving here November 8, 1881, coming in a wagon and accompanied by Charles Ford. They rented a house in the corner of Lafayette and 21st Streets. There they stayed 2 months, and then they secured the house number 1381 on Lafayette Street, formerly property of a councilman in Ellsbury, paying $14 a month for it and given the name of Thomas Howard. The house was a 1-story cottage, painted white with green shutters, and is romantically situated on the brow of a lofty eminence east of the city, commanding a fine view of the principal portion of the city, river, and railroads, and adapted by nature for the perilous and desperate calling of Jesse James. Just east of this house is a deep, gulch-like ravine. Beyond that, a broad expanse of open territory, backed by a belt of timber. The house, except for its west side, can be seen for several miles. There is a large yard attached to the cottage, and a stable where Jesse had been keeping 2 horses, which were found there this morning. Charles and Robert Ford had been occupying one of the rooms in his rear of the dwelling, and had secretly had an understanding to kill Jesse ever since last fall. Ever since the boys had been with Jesse, they had watched for an opportunity to shoot him, but he was always so heavily armed that it was impossible to draw a weapon without James seeing it. They declared that they had no idea of taking him alive, considering his undertaking suicidal. The opportunity they had long wished for came this morning. Breakfast was over, and Charlie Ford and Jesse James had been to the stable, currying the horses preparatory to their night ride. And returning to the room where Robert Ford was, Jesse said, "It's an awful hot day." He pulled off his coat and vest and tossed them on the bed. Then he said, "I guess I'll take off my pistols for fear somebody will see them if I walk in the yard." He unbuckled his belt, in which he carried 2 .45 revolvers, one a Smith & Wesson, the other a Colt, and laid them on the bed with his coat and vest. Then picked up a dusting brush with his intention of dusting some pictures which hung on the wall. To do so, he got on a chair. His back was now turned to the brothers, who silently stepped between Jesse and his revolvers. At a motion from Charlie, both drew their guns. Robert was the quicker of the 2, and at one motion he had the long weapon to a level with his eye, and the muzzle not more than 4 feet from the back of the outlaw's head. Even in that motion, quick as thought, there was something which did not escape the acute ears of the hunted man. He made a motion as if to turn his head to ascertain the cause of the suspicious sound, but too late. A nervous pressure of the trigger, a quick flash and a sharp report, and a well-directed ball crashed through the outlaw's skull. There was no outcry, just a swaying of the body as it fell heavily backwards onto the carpet of the floor. The shot had been fatal, and all the bullets in the chambers of Charlie's revolver, so directed at Jesse's head, could no more evidently have decided the fate of the greatest bandit and freebooter that ever figured in the pages of this country's history. The ball had entered the base of the skull and made its way out through the forehead, over the left eye. It had been fired out of a Colt .45's improved pattern and silver-mounted and pearl-handled pistol presented by a dead man to his slayer only a few days before. Mrs. James was in the kitchen when the shooting was done, separated from a room in which the bloody tragedy occurred in the dining room. She heard the shot, and dropping her household duties, ran to the front room. She saw her husband lying extended on his back, his slayers, each holding his revolver in his hand, making for the fence at the rear of the house. Robert had reached the enclosure and was about in the act of scaling it when she stepped out the door and called back to him.
"Robert, you've done this! Come back!"
Robert answered, "I swear to God I didn't." Then they returned to where she stood. Mrs. James ran to the side of her husband and lifted up his head. Life was not yet extinct, and when she asked him if he was hurt, it seemed to her that he wanted to say something, but could not. She tried to wash the blood away that was coursing over his face from the hole in his forehead, but it seemed to her rather that the blood would come faster than she could wipe away, and in her hands Jesse James died. Charlie Ford explained to Mrs. James that the pistol had accidentally gone off.
Yes, said Miss James. I guess it went off on purpose.
Meaning Charlie had gone back to the house and brought about 2 hats, and the 2 boys left the house. They went to the telegraph office and sent a message to Sheriff Timberlake of Clay County, to Police Commissioner Craig of Kansas, to Governor Crittenden and other officers, and then surrendered themselves to Marshal Craig, Enos Craig of St. Joseph. When the Ford boys appeared at the police station, they were told by an officer that Marshal Craig and the posse of officers had gone to the direction of the James residence, and they started after them and surrendered themselves. They accompanied the officers to the house and returned in custody of the police to the marshal's headquarters, where they were furnished with dinner, and about 3 p.m. were moved to the old circuit courtroom, where the inquest was held in the presence of an immense crowd. Okay. And now we've got another song. And this is the one about Quantrell. That's what I'm sticking. That's being a book. Okay, this is 1 page. Apparently Quantrell doesn't account to much. Despite someone often in my chat saying that he destroyed their town. Well, we're about to hear a song about that. So. This is in 6/8. It gives me the music for the verses. Oh well, I'll try it anyway. Quantrell. Come on, you robbers, and open your ears. Of Quantrell the Lionheart you will quickly hear. With his band of bold raiders and double time quick, he came to lay Lawrence down lower the line. All routing and shooting and giving the hell, like many demons just raising up from hell. The boys were drunken and powder with wine. They came to burn Lawrence just over the line. They came to burn Lawrence, they came not to stay. They rode in one morning and breaking of day, with guns all a-waving and horses all foam, the Quantrell riding his famous big roan. All rooting and shooting and giving the yell, like so many demons just raised up from hell. The boys were all drunken with powder and wine, and came to burn Lawrence just over the line. They came to burn Lawrence, they came not to stay. Jim Lane was up at the break of the day. He saw them a-comin' and got in a fright. He crawled in the corn crib to get out of sight. All rooting and shooting and giving the yell, like so many demons just raised up from hell. The boys were all drunken with powder and wine, and came to burn Lawrence just over the line. Quantrell's a fighter, a bold-hearted boy, a brave man or woman he'd never annoy. He'd take from the wealthy and give to the poor. For brave men there's never a bolt to his door. All rooting and shooting and giving the yell, like so many demons just raised up from hell. The boys were all drunken with powder and wine, and came to burn Lawrence just over the line. Okay, I like that song. Anyway, that's all we get on Quantrell. Just a song. The next one, for some reason, is a celebrity in the Dallas area. I'm not sure why. I'm so many places after him. Here's our next person, Sam Bass. 1. The Sam Bass Legend. Soon after his death, the relics of Sam Bass began to crop up in nearby every town in the central and northern Texas. If all the authentic Bass guns could be gathered in one place, they would stock an arsenal. The contemporary newspaper supported the claim of Milt Tucker of Georgetown that Bass gave him his gun when captured. Other guns, owned by two rangers, Dick Ware and John L. Bannister, were also said to have been surrendered by Bass when captured. The fourth gun, for which the same claim was made to be sold at an auction in Austin soon afterwards. Sam's cartridge belt, with a few unused bullets, was given to the University of Texas Library. His compass went to Captain Dan W. Roberts of the Texas Rangers, while Captain June Peak retained the bowie knife taken from the body of the Arkansas Johnson at Salt Creek. Horns or steers said to have been killed by Bass were sold at fancy prices, and a carpenter of Snyder nailed to the top of his tool chest a horseshoe supposed to have been worn by the dead mayor. G. W. Allen, a mule team freighter and storekeeper in Old Round Rock, possessed a hat said to have been given to him by Sam Bass. Another headpiece, described as the identical hat which Sam Bass wore from the time of his capture, was displayed at a bar of the old El Paso Hotel at 4th and Main, Fort Worth, about 3 weeks after Sam was buried. The hat was a limp one with a low crown and a wide brim. The owner, C.A. Sparks, traveling agent for the St. Louis wholesale hat firm, said Bass gave him the hat, and he showed corroborative statements from citizens of Round Rock. Near Belton, people pointed to live oaks from which Sam Bass was said to have shot his initials while riding at full speed. In Round Rock, Henry Koppel and his successors showed visitors the bandits' bullet marks in the store, and the Sam Bass Cafe opened across the street. Every cave within the area was said to have been a hiding place for the outlaw band. Boy Scouts in Denton have explored a cave at Pilot Knob, imagining they were in the Brigade's rendezvous. The wild recess of the hills in Palo Pinto County has become known as Sam Bass Hollow. Longhorn Cavern, about 40 miles west of Georgetown, had been widely advertised as a former haunt of the famous outlaw, though it is doubtful if he was ever within 35 miles of the place. Thickets, as well as caves, have been pointed out as the desperados' hiding places. Bass hideouts in Texas have become as numerous as George Washington beds in Virginia. On their way back to Denton County, from their 4th Texas train robbery in Mesquite, Sam and his irregulars were said to have hidden for a day or two in the Boss the Heart thickets just north of Dallas, on what later became the campus of Southern Methodist University. A short distance west of the thicket, story goes, a Negro youngster named Bob was looking after a herd of hogs when a stranger approached on horse and asked what he was doing. "Herding hogs, sir," the boy replied. "You know who I am," the writer said. "No, sir, I ain't sure who's sure. I'm Sam Bass." This statement almost paralyzed the youngster, whose fear was not lessened when Bass whipped out his gun, pointed it at Bob, then returned it to the holster. "Boy, I ought to kill you," he said, "but I won't. There are men following me. When they get here, you tell them I've gone towards the Trinity River." The bandit then rode off to the north, and Bob ran along the opposite side until he was out of breath. As he stopped to rest, a posse headed by Sheriff Marion Moon rode up. The frightened boy told them Bass had ridden westward toward the river. Many of the legends that took root in cattle camps and hearthsides magnified Sam's crimes as well as the size of his loot. Most of these stories were as fictitious as those in the Texas verse writer who described Bass as stealing a pig when the Indiana youth was only 10 years old. More plausible was the Denton County story that, at the outset of his robbing career, Sam tried to hold up Henry Hill of Little Elm. Hill, who went by the name of Rawhide, was building a cotton gin and had gone to Dallas to obtain money for wages and other expenses. Returning to Louisville by train, he hired a livery horse and started home. Sam and his two companions waylaid him, and after exiting the chase, shot his horse from under him. At this, Hill grabbed his saddlebags containing the money and took refuge in a nearby farmhouse. The amateur robbers then gave up the pursuit and rode away. Although sheriffs and rangers seldom cited him, legendary encounters with this elusive Sam were reported from many places. He once stopped a Negro near Cave Hollow and asked him to trade horses, but the well-mounted darky refused. "Do you know who I am?" asked the brigand. "I'm Sam Bass." This news, the Negro tumbled off his horse and began to run for his life. Sam called him back, however, after the saddles were changed, and handed him $75. He ran short of money at last. Bass always paid well for his fresh mounts, usually with gold stolen from the Union Pacific Express at Big Springs. Once he stopped a cattleman in the northern part of Dallas County and asked him for chewing tobacco. "You can buy more, I can't." And the rancher handed over a plug, and Sam cut off a piece, and returning the remainder with $50. Bass then offered $50 for the man's horse, but replied that he had only paid half that amount for the nag. "Oh, that's all right. I'll take that mule of yours to make up the difference," said Sam. The trade was made, and both men went off, well satisfied. Some of the stories have to do with banks Sam tried to rob or thought of robbing, but didn't, although court testimony indicated that Bass sent Billy Scott to inspect the bank at Weatherford. Legend has it that Desperado led his whole band there to look over the financial situation. They found Jim Coutts, a trigger-fingered banker, seated on a curb in front of his place on the south side of the square. Sam already was acquainted with the rugged financier, and the setup didn't look promising. For some time, the bandit leader sat on the dry goods box and whittled while his men walked up and down in front of the bank. Later, they decided that before they could rob the bank, they would have to kill the Coutts. As they didn't want to undertake the job, they mounted their horse and rode away. The generosity of Sam, with the $20 gold pieces he brought back from the big train robbery in Nebraska, gave him the fame as a Robin Hood, even while he was living. And after his death, the stories of his giving and spending were enlarged. Payments of $20 for a dozen eggs or a pan of warm biscuits were reported from many directions. On one occasion, he was said to have stopped with his outlaw band at their farm home in Denton County. Widow. Against the woman's wishes, robbers stayed overnight, but Bass told his men that the widow was a lady and must be treated as such. The men behaved themselves and did no drinking. When they left the next morning, Bass paid the widow $50. Many stories were told at the expense of those who pursued the outlaw band. A cocky young Breckenridge lawyer was said to have had heavily armed posse against Bass, whom he expected to capture by nightfall. When the pursuers found the desperado, Sam refused to flee, and therefore the posse could not chase him. Rather than approach too close to the notorious gunman, the men and the posse rode home and reported that Bass could not be found. From Breckenridge also came the tale of a young detective who arrived with the announcement that he was going to kill Sam Bass. Walking along the road toward the supposed hideout of the brigand, he received a lift from a man in a buggy. He explained his mission to the driver, who asked if he would know Sam Bass if he saw him. "No," said the detective. "Oh, you're riding with him now," his companion calmly remarked. The detective began trembling and begging for his life until his wife and children at home. He was released, and this was the last time he went out looking for Sam Bass. However, another amateur detective in Breckenridge was said to have given a better account of himself. This young fellow, who roomed at the town's only hotel, began talking about capturing Sam Bass when the outlaws were rumored to be camping in Stevens County. Not rating this self-appointed detective's courage as highly as they might, several young fellows from town decided to play a trick on him by impersonating the train robber band and giving the pursuer a big scare when he was deployed in that direction. A young newspaper editor, Homer Davenport, agreed to lead the detective to a place in the country where no others would be hidden. The editor led the bandit catcher up a hillside. Shots were fired by the pranksters from behind rocks at the summit, and the two men started to run back. The editor fell on his rifle as planned and called out that he was killed. After running a little further, the detective suddenly turned and, marching deliberately back to the supposed corpse, pistol in hand, muttering, "I can't leave a man like that," began firing at the men who took the brigands holding behind the rocks, firing to kill. Not until the corpse rolled off the joints of the fleeing townsman did he see through the trick. It was 2 days before Davenport mustered enough courage to resume his meals at the hotel. The most persistent of all the Bass legends have been those of buried gold. A Denton saloon keeper was said to have buried $600 worth of Sam's double eagles at a spot within the town. $30,000 of this loot was reported buried in Montague County, northwest of Denton. A cave near McNeil, a few miles south of Round Rock, and another in Llano County were also said to have received some of his stolen treasure. For more than half a century, men armed with maps and spades, and sometimes with divining rods, have been looking for the chests of gold they believed Sam buried. One of the earliest stories of the outlaws' buried riches came from a young farmer, Henry Chapman, who lived near Springtown in Parker County. In 1879, Chapman was riding a mule through the woods of from Harrison's Gin at the pool of Clear Forks to Squire Milliner's place near the mouth of Salt Creek. At a point where Skeens Peak, his mule became scared, gave a large, hard lurch, and broke the saddle girth. When he was dismounted, mending the girth, Chapman discovered a fresh pile of dirt buried with pieces of brush. He supposed at first that some fellow had been hiding in the woods and murdered, but he was curious enough to remove the brush and the loose earth. Within a few minutes, as he related afterwards, he unearthed a walnut box big enough to hold a bushel and a half. The box was crammed with gold and silver coins, including many $20 gold pieces. The first impulse was to fill his pockets, but he remembered that he had a sack under his saddle. He quickly procured his sack and began to fill it with the treasure from the walnut box. As the coins were clinking into the sack, Chapman happened to look up and was terrified to see 8 men advancing on him with guns leveled at his head. As he was unarmed and hastily mounted, he immediately galloped up. He never saw the gunmen again, but he was sure they were associates of Sam Bass, who had come back for treasure they had helped the outlaw bury in the previous summer. From Austin to Red River, caves were searched for gold. Rubber maps and diagrams began to appear. And several years after the turn of the century, Andy Hamilton, a Round Rock librarian, was in Mexico and obtained from an American there a map that showed just where Sam Bass's treasure was buried. Hamilton brought the map back to Round Rock and let 2 of his friends, B.H. Allen and George Townsley, enter the secret. The map indicated that the treasure was hidden in the hollow tree in the old Leander and Liberty Hill Road, 2 miles northwest of Round Rock. Equipped with axes and lanterns, the men went to the scene late at night and chopped down the tree. The only metallic substance they found, however, was a single rusty nail. The next morning, people who passed along the road wondered why the tree trunk had been chopped to bits and none of the wood carried away. 2 decades later, other men with other maps were observed digging for Sam's gold in the neighborhood of Cove Hollow, more than 40 miles northwest of Denton. As late as January 1928, feverish treasure hunters carried the search into the city of Dallas. The searchers had seen an old penciled map that showed where Sam had buried $200,000 worth of gold bullion and other valuables. The hiding place was under a forked stump near a spring at the west side of the Trinity River. The spot was located, and for several weeks nocturnal excavations were made on the section of the river bluff owned by the Marcus Plowman, 2 blocks north of Oak Cliff End and Houston Street Viaduct. That explains why so many things were named after him. Oh, another damn song. Oh, this is a long song, too. Okay, the song isn't so much long as it's got notes written about it. So this will be interesting the end of it. 2. The Song. That night, the song of Sam Bass was sung. It generally is where men are who know it. The old wanderer was a singer, and did his part with gusto, with the song halted frequently to enable the singer to give parenthetical explanations. Oh, that's my books. It was something like this. This is the song of Sam Bass. He was a true-blooded hero. He was a kindly-natured fellow. I knew old Dan Egan, the sheriff of Denton County, Sam's first boss, and this is how the song goes. It actually has that as an introduction. Sam Bass was born in Indiana, which was his native home. Before he reached his young manhood, a boy began to roam. Lawrence County, where he was born, 1851, and the gravestone don't lie, July 21st. He came out to Texas a cowboy to be working with Dan Eldon, like I said. Then he drifted down to the south end town, and after a while he went up to Uvalde County. First came to Texas a cowboy to be a better-hearted fellow you scarce could hope to see. All the fellows good-hearted. That's their downfall. Their good-heartedness is. But dadgummed Jim Crow laws, they don't care about a man's good-heartedness. Anyone knows that. See, where was I? Sam bought him first some ranch stock and also a Denton mare. He marched her in the races and took her to the fair. He fairly coined money and spent it frank and free. He drank the best whiskey wherever he might be. Let me tell you this. That mare was sure good. Sam put right smart money into her. Cleaned up a lot, too. He did, I'd say. A little sorrel she was. Dad Aiken offered Sam to give up the mare and quit his job. But Sam loved her like a child. A man can love a mare or his dog more faithful than he can love a woman. He left where he was working one pretty summer day, heading to the Black Hills with his cattle and his pay. In Custer City, sold the lot and went on a spree. He chums all the cowboys rough and hard as could be. Deadwood. It was in Deadwood, in the Dakotas. Wide open town. Sam, his boss was Joe Collins, who bought his cattle on time, they'd heard him say, when he was sold out, gambled and lost. Or Sam, him, and Sam, they had a stagecoach in there too, and the song didn't tell nothing of it. Riding back to Texas, they robbed the UP train. For safety, split the couples and started again. The sheriff took Joe Collins, who had a sack of mail, and with his partner landed him inside the county jail. Big Springs, not Big Springs, Texas, but Big Springs, Nebraska. The express messenger said it was one of them dadgum time locks unsafe, and so one of the men started to lay him out, but Sam, being a kind-hearted, wouldn't stand for that. So they went about and quit. And what they did was come about 3 boxes of gold and $20 pieces, about $60,000. To do the right thing, they went through the cars and took another $5,000 to the passengers. This Joe Collins, he had met up with the store clerk in Ogallala and went back to bury things after the holdup. Sam Leach don't give information, but the posse caught up with Collins and Bill Hefford in Kansas, right where was some U.S. Army men who lit after the outlaws. They tried to stand off the soldiers, but the men fired and killed them both. So the song's wrong about the jail, but that's putting it in poetry. You can't always have such things like there are in poetry. Poetry ain't what you call truth. There ain't no room for verses. About Sam, him, Jack, and Davis, they lit out to Texas. Jim Barry and Dad from Mexico City, Missouri. And the song goes on about Sam. But Sam got back to Texas all right up in the crate, and in the town of Denton his money did share. But Sam got back to Texas all side up with care, and in the town of Denton he did his money share. He was the boy to do that right. I forgot to say that this here Jim Barry was caught by the posse, shot in the knee, and that bone was shattered. Old Dad got away safe with the share. I'll start up again. But Sam got back to Texas all right up in the share. Yeah. But Sam got back to Texas all right up with the care, and in the town of Denton he did his money share. The lad, he was so reckless, 3 robberies did he do, a passenger and express car and the U.S. mail car too. What isn't in the song that's about Sam Bass and Bill met up with a crowd of cavalrymen and camped with them, joking about the robberies and them soldiers never suspecting anything. The Texas train robberies was on the TP at the Eagle Ford and the Mesquite Junction. Now Sam, he had full partners, old bold and daring bad. There was Richardson, Jackson, and Joe Collins and old Dad. More daring, bolder outlaws the Rangers never knew. They dodged the Texas Rangers and beat them too. Sam had another partner called Arkansas for short, but Thomas Floyd was a Ranger, cut his career quite short. This Floyd stood 6 feet in the socks and passed for a mighty fly, but them that knows will tell you he's deadbeat on the sly. And then about that Floyd, the Ranger only part of the poetry. I heard one tell the best jokes of the Rangers, good enough for that book. There ain't nothing what the Ranger won't tackle. Well, when Fort Worth is started up and there's some kind of trouble, they pretty much cover right. So they wired down to the headquarters of Rangers to keep the order. What they did do was send the same fort. The mayor and the people, head up all about the trouble, was down in the depot when this fort gets up. The mayor, he says, we sent for Rangers, all right. Said Ford says, here I am. Well, ain't there no more than one of you, says the mayor. Why, said Ford. Is there more than one rat? Joe comes in here where, it's about Ford. He knew he could handle a rat all right, single-handed. Come natural to him. But the mayor couldn't see it that way. That's where the joke comes in. One ranger to a rat. It's sure funny. Anyway, him who killed Sam was Dick Ware. He did it with 45. Jim Murphy was arrested and then had a bail. He jumped the train to Terrell and to breaking Taylor's jail. But old Mayor Jones stood in with Jim, and it was stall, and put up a job to catch poor Sam before the fall. About this Murphy, Sam was very suspicious of him and wanted to shoot Murphy. Murphy and Jackson, they was cousins, and there ought to be something about that song. But there ain't. Some poet ought to put it in. I tried, but I can't make it go right. This Murphy had agreed to double-cross Sam, agreed with General Jones, and Sam got to hear of it, and that's why they wanted to shoot him. Sam met his fate in Red Rocks on July the 21st. They dropped the poor boy with rifle balls, and then they took his purse. For Sam, he's a dead lad, and 6 feet under clay, and Jackson's a mesquite aiming to get away. At Red Rock, sure enough, there was Jackson holding the Ranger's back shooting with his right hand while he helped Sam get in the saddle. Jackson struck by Sam at the end, and Sam shot through his kidneys. 3 days Sam suffered, and when he died, he was buried in Round Rock. I've seen the gravestone. Murphy, he committed suicide, drinking eye medicine. And there ought to be something about that in the song. But there ain't. Jim had took Sam Bass's gold and didn't want to pay. His only idea was to give Sam away. He sold out to Sam the Barnes and left their friends to mourn. And Jim, he'll get a scorching when Gabriel blows his horn. Perhaps he's got to heaven, there's none of us can say. My guess is a surmise he's gone the other way. But if brave Sam could see him in the place that he rolls, there'll be a lively mix-up down there among the coals. I made up that last part to get the rats about it, Murphy going to hell. There's a lot more verses, said the old man in ending. A regular raft of them, 100 or more. For this Sam Bass, he had a horse, and then he came a long tale about how Sam had been pursued by Rangers from Denton to Fort Concho, the animal taking steep-banked creeks in the side, carrying its rider down the canyon sides where human foot could not find place, carrying on unfalteringly, and at last, when danger threatened, walking its sleeping master by shaking. It was an adaptation of Nick Swift and Dick Turpin, with the boldest deeds given to the Indiana lad. And, at the end, Sam Bass, he looked to the east and the west and the sky and the silver cloud. He took off his every garment to make the horse a shroud. He dropped a tear to think he was brave and a horse must part. 'Twas not the ride that killed her, 'twas the broken heart. Oh. Yeah. I'm going to have such a fun time editing out that weekend. And here I am complaining about not having songs for my stream. Oh well. If anyone wants to try to make a song for the stream, by all means, feel free. Next would be Stackalee. He was born with a veil over his face. The gypsy sold Stack's mother, told her like a friend, your baby gentle baby. Gypsy told Stack's mother, told her like a friend, your double-gented baby won't come to no good end. And the gypsy woman sure was hateful, 'cause it was all that come out of her way. And how comes Stacklee's mother to call of a fetch and tell her, and was caused to come kicking into the world, wide-eyed, double-gented, with a face set full of teeth? But the scared her most was that he had a veil over his face, and everybody knows that when babies are born with veils, and their faces can see ghosts and raise 41 kinds of hell. His soul sold his soul to the devil. And so when Stackalee growed up, he got an awful rascal and round her with lots of trifling women and stayed drunk all the time. One dark night he come staggering down the road and the devil popped up real sudden, like a grinning jumping jack. He carried Stackalee into the graveyard and bought his soul, and that's how come Stack could go around doing things no other living man could do, such as making himself so little he could get into a bottle on a shelf and you could look at him when he was sitting there, just and filling a bottle full with water and setting it on a big old glass jar, where it would sink to the bottom, until he began to talk to it and make it rise up and dap through the hollows every way he wanted. And by walking barefoot on hot slag out of a pig iron furnace and never getting burnt, or eating all the hot fire he could hand him without burning his stomach and changing himself into a mountain or varmint. Some old timers, though they knowed him personally, that his favorite night shape was a prowling wolf. That's how it come to use to become. Yeah. That's how come it used to sing this old song about him. Stackalee didn't wear no shoe, can tell his track from a horse or a mule. The magic hat. You see, it happened like this. Stack was crazy about Stetson hats, especially if those great big 5-gallon with dimples in the crown. He had a whole row of them hanging on pegs, and you could look at them along the wall of his rickety shanty in Market Street in St. Louis, where he lived with that woman, Stack of Dollars, that I'm going to tell you about later. He had a dimpled and lemon-colored yellow hat, and a black Sunday one with 2 white eyes to wear at funerals, and with the brigands, and lots of other ones, all kinds and colors. But his favorite was an oxblood magic hat that folks claimed he made out of the raw hide of a man-eating panther that the devil had skinned alive. And, like I told you, how come Stack have it? Because he had sold his soul to Old Scratch. You see, Satan heard of Stack's weakness, so he met him in the dark night and took him to the graveyard, where he coaxed him into trading his soul, promised him that he could do all kinds of magic and devilish things, as long as he wore that oxblood Stetson, and didn't get it away from him. And that's why the devil fixed it, so that when Stack did lose, he would lose his head, and kill a good citizen, and run right smack into his doom. His girlfriend. Now, Stackalee had a girlfriend, and her name was Stack of Dollars. She blew into St. Louis off Cincinnati's old Bucktown, on the levee where she used to run gambling games at a saloon there called the Silver Moon, long, long ago. And she always bet her whole stack of silver dollars. She walked until the Silver Moon, stacked her dollars mountain high. Says they stuck me $1, 'cause my limit is the sky. She had 2 diamond teeth with gold filling, and when she opened her mouth, a sunburst smile, they didn't glitter. Proud of them sparkles, too, 'cause they like shining flashlights. Wouldn't pawn 'em or get old Stackalee out of hand. And since they was fastened to her head, they were safe 'cause she was a fat mama with the meat shake in her bones. She didn't let no man for bouncer. She feared nothing and nobody. Her motto was, come clean or come dirty and get cleaned. She could put a knot in a boy's head so big that he wouldn't know whether he's not on him or he was on the knot. She had a full bosom, or an 8-gallon stallion, or an 8-gallon Stetson, smoked cheeroots and was tougher than a Big Mag of Chicago's old Cheyenne district. She ruled the levees with her big fists, and even old double-jinted Stanley, big enough to go bear hunt with the Lewis witch, had to let out when they had them Sunday night fistfights, 'cause she would roll up her sleeves and begin smacking him around till her shanty shook like when Joshua fixed the Battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. But she was good-hearted, though, when she was sober. And long, tall Stack, who was a gambler with plenty of good-looking browns, claimed he liked her because she whipped him so good. Stackalee goes west. Now, like I told you, Stack was popular with the women folks as he could whip up the blues on the guitar and beat out a boogie-woogie music, piano bass, and like that. But they all liked about him most was he was so stout he could squeeze the breath out of him. And his favorite one was a voodoo queen down in New Orleans French Market. Anyway, the woman got to bargain on him being so stout that they reckoned he could give old Jesse James a good tussle. So, Stack, with his gun handle filled with notches, no reward out for him when the men were washed away, he load down the lucky cart and magic Stetson and keep on a-hiding, but he figured that he better light out once he was going good. So he thought he would look up Jesse James for giving her a trial. Stackalee went out west, met Jesse James, and did his best. Yes, sir, that fool even got mixed up with Jesse James, but Jesse was too much for him, turned old Stack every way but loose. The Lord knows what he might have happened to Stack if the devil hadn't come down the road in the cloud of dust that got in Jesse's eyes. Leastwise, it might be saved from city of San Francisco, and it might have kept old Stack from getting into all them amazing things I'm going to tell you about later. And leastwise, the devil wouldn't have changed him to look like Billy Lyons or to get poor innocent Billy killed. Damn, 2 more bots? Stackalee changes himself into a horse. Anyway, after the devil had saved from Jesse James, Stack, knowing that the law was hot after him, lit out again, heading west. And it was on the way over the mountains that he run into 2 Chola deputies on their lookout for him in order to collect the $5,000 reward offered for his arrest. So Stack sat down to swap a few words, and with them 2 big mountains before they had caught who was on. Then he told them that he didn't aim to hurt them, he just wanted to know what their names was. When they told him, the sucker hauled out his .45 and shot their initials in their hats, and changed himself into a hoss and galloped away up to a lot of little red baby devils riding on his back. And did them deputies run the other direction? They knowed it was Satan's work, and they thought that maybe Stack was the devil himself. Tell you the truth, think I'm lying. Had to run sideways to keep from flying. So scared was they tore out of a graveyard, knocking tombstones over like 10 pins in a bowling alley. So Stack, he held his sides laughing and sat down between them 2 big mountains and thought, and finally made up his mind to go to Frisco, where he later called the Black Samson. Stackalee lays San Francisco low. Now here comes the most amazing part of the story. Stack had been in Frisco about a month, getting leaping drunk and just about running himself crazy. One morning in April in 1906, after he had a rocky night and had a headache built of a hippopotamus who was looking for a sudden jerk and eye-opener to cool his burning thirst in his throat. Into the first ballroom he staggered. He didn't have a penny on him, but he had a fistful of tricks in his magic outfit Stetson, and he was sure he could pull off some kind of conjuration to get his morning's juice. But the bartender told him, "Listen here, colored man, I ain't getting even the bottom of the glass till gin till you shows me the color of your money." Stack got all big at the nose and woofed. "All right, boss, you either fixes me up with that gin or I pulls down this bar." The bartender, he just shook his head, grinning and looking sassy. So Stack laid a bolt on the bar, and both hands, and sweat as big as marbles rolled down his face as he huffed and puffed and blew. Stack knew that he didn't know his own strength, but when he gave one powerful jerk, down came the ceiling, and the whole building said, "My goodness, I should have aimed to get so rough. Damned if I ain't gone and made a mess for sure." It happened so fast that it scared Stack himself. It was the water pipes. Outside was more wrecks than you could shake a stick at. Buildings tumbling down all over. "Lordy, sure didn't know my own strength," Stack said with a crowd of people in the street. They tried to tell him about an earthquake, but Stack didn't pay them no mind. "It was the water pipes," he said. "They're all fastened together all over town. When I gave that last powerful jerk, I must have pulled out the faucet of the saloon and snatched down the whole town." He soon lit out there for St. Louis, where he might run smack into his doom. Okay, well, I'm going to end it there. It's dialect is getting to me. Can't believe I had 4 butts tonight, though. That's insane. But anyway. Okay. Okay. Oh, there we are. OBS, everything's slow. So, let's see who is on We Can Raid. As per usual, if anyone has suggestions, feel free. I think I saw the harp was on. Yep, harp is on. Cool. So, thank you everyone for coming in tonight. I hope you appreciated some of the stranger tales of American folklore history. Now the music comes on. But yeah, we're going to Red Heart Griffin. I didn't see what they're reading. Let me check real quick. Oh, Dracula. Okay. Go from American folklore to Romanian folklore? Technically. Anyway. Hope I will see everyone back for tomorrow night for fairy tales. Hopefully with a lot less singing. This next week, I'm going to have a song about Stackalee, and it's going to be... But anyway... Night all. I guess it helps when I actually start the raid, right? Anyway, have a good night.